If there's an Olympics in adaptability, Filipinos would sweep the silver and gold medals.
Somehow, I do not really relax in my own country because I was born in the Philippines, but because my mother was close to me, and I didn't learn how to speak the languages. All I knew was how to speak the Tagalog of the children.
The word is survival, is not adaptation. Other nationalities also go there, not knowing the culture. You have to go with the flow. It's a matter of life and death, survival din.
Ang araw ng katwiran na sumisikat sa silanganan. Itinuturo. Sa mga matang malaong nabulagan ang landas na dapat tunguhin. Itinuturo ng katwiran magkaisang loob. Itinuturo ng katwiran magkaisang isip. Itinuturo ng katwiran magkaisa na maihanap ng lunas. Panahon na lumitaw ang liwanag. Panahon na lumitaw ang liwanag.
I'm Joel Vega. I'm a writer and a visual artist.
My name is Tita Lacambra Ayala. I'm supposed to be a writer and a poet, a writer of short stories and a poet and a painter all at the same time, and also a mother.
One advantage would be you survive, you can even excel if you blend into a foreign culture. You somehow expand your knowledge because you learn new skills.
The adaptation, I think, is positive. Because as long as we don't overdo it, and as long as it doesn't lead to crime.
The disadvantage would be you might lose a part of yourself in the sense that you had to give up a certain way of thinking.
All the OFWs, they're happy, and then they feel that they're able to have their families, happy in the country also. They're so patriotic on their part. Well, I think it's a good thing to be globalized.
Do you know that the biggest Filipino migrant community in Alaska are Filipinos? So even in Alaska, in such a cold, barren place, there are Filipinos. And also there's another island, I forgot the name, somewhere in Scandinavia, Northern Europe. There are Filipinos there, together of course with Chinese migrants. So I'm just amazed how we easily adapt into our new environments.
From Baguio, where the people were mostly Ilocanos. So I'm also pure Ilocano. So I spoke the language with my family. So when we came down to Manila, it was difficult because I didn't know a word of Tagalog. When you learn a new language, you might try to understand it in the way you have your background, what your background is.
The first and foremost thing that drove me to work abroad, the adventure. I was open to experiencing new things. I wanted to travel.
I'm an adventurer, and I'm always curious. Any new experience is a new adventure for me. A change in status is a new adventure. There are challenges, you're supposed to meet them.
I am in favor of the adapting because it gives you something in return. It widens your perspective. It can also push you into new territory, and in doing so, you enrich your experience.
I don't know if I'm resilient, but I know that I always want to survive the weather. I cannot swim, by the way, so in the water I cannot survive.
Adapting or adjusting, to me it's second nature almost, because for journalists, you really have to be flexible when you deal with people, when you deal with circumstances, because one day is different from the other.
We're a normal country, but we're just more intense than anybody else. We're more intense Because we have too many desires and dreams. We were running after them.
Preparation is important because it somehow diminishes the problems that you might encounter later on. As a journalist, it's a instinctive kind of thing. So I felt that, I had to read a lot about the place, ask people about it.
Let's look at all the OFWs in all the parts of the world. They're part of the scenery. They just fit in. They're supposed to be resilient.
I was befriended with some Muslims. I had close friends, and he was working in a recruitment company with domestic helpers. So I met, these people in my everyday routine. So I asked the domestic helpers what they think of, working there. I heard a lot about the horror stories, and as a journalist, you know about these horror stories, but from another viewpoint. And I realized that if one is naive, you could end up in serious problems.
Working in Manila was mostly for my own good, for my own survival. Good to study. And writing was the only thing that made me earn money because that was the only skill I knew. And I found out I could be paid for it. So, second year of high school, in college, I started to work for papers.
You don't evolve politically if you don't go back to what had happened in the past. So you had to confront it before you can go to the next stage. So we do have this trait to adapt, but at the expense of something else.
My father was a veteran. He has been discharged and he found a job in Manila, so we went down to Manila. It was up to me to catch up, to learn the language and survive.
Of all the literary genres, poetry is considered the most sacrosanct. The word implies sacredness.
Checkpoints. They crawl backwards from exits, sharp as fish scales, clean as knives, their movement fluid in black water, nimbler in thin air. In refrigerated spaces, they are almost invisible, more cunning than spotted crabs conspiring in the depths of the North Atlantic.
Poetry, it could zoom in and out of a certain experience or object within a few lines. My poetry doesn't always refer to memories. It could be an anticipation of a certain kind of feeling or situation, description of a landscape, and what that landscape means to me. For me, the original trigger is inside you. So you had to acknowledge that urgency, and you had to somehow respond to that feeling. There's always that feeling of restlessness, and when that feeling comes, I had to have a pen to write at least what comes into me. It's not the end material, it's the raw material. And then I go back to it to be a line, and then it goes to the next. And then I look at it and reread it and then rewrite it. When I felt that the feeling has passed or that I have exhausted expressing what that feeling is, then to me more or less it's complete. What is important is the authenticity of the experience and the authenticity of the voice.
Country of origin, blank. Birthplace, blank. Name and nationality changed like chameleon skin. Aliases, camouflage, plans, motives, and crimes. There is no antidote, repeat, no antidote, against arbitrary arrest. Detention, interrogation, a few $1,000s do not buy asylum or rule out illegal custody.
I contributed a poem to Caracoa, that's from the Philippine Literary Arts Council. And I think that was a poem about Ermita. And somehow, a copy, ended up in the States. Manuel Roy is a pre-war poet. He read the poem and he wrote to me. From there, I wrote back, and then he wrote back. So we had an exchange of letters. I think it was in the 1980s. And in a way, that was a kind of mentorship. The correspondence with Manuel Viray made me realize how powerful words can be.
What is cast off splits and falls away from the rejuvenating body like blue-black feathers caught in the tightness of twigs or horns, amber-tinted at the breaking end, now ring to snap cleanly.
First rule of thumb, reading. Second, reading. And third, reading. Yeah, that's the only way I hone my craft. I read a lot.
Desiring the necessary calcium that hardness against this intemperate cold. Amphibians eat their shed skin. Witness their slithering tanks.
I have two elder sisters, and they would tell me stories. They are more into practical careers, like the eldest is a nurse, and the second ended up also as a nurse in Hawaii school. So that's one primary, thing, drive that I said I want to go to school because I want to read. I must be around 7. I lost something. It was a cat, a porcelain cat. It fell, it broke, and I was devastated as a kid. My mother said, "Oh, why don't you write, that you lost your cat?" But I can't barely, write. But somehow, when I wrote it, I felt the feeling of loss was much less. Writing helps in, lessening some feeling of, loss or whatever. I attended a sectarian school. So immediately, I enjoy the English classes. Most of the time, I'm on my own. And when I go into the library, I was in my element. It opened up a lot of worlds because reading is basically that. And that's the first time I had this sense of, I want to travel. I was admitted into UP. And then it was a decision between UPLB and Diliman. I saw that UPLB has an offering communication arts major in creative writing, so I chose UPLB. I applied for it, and they took some poetry samples. I mean, you know how the workshop goes. And it turned out to be a fun experience because the panelists were quite supportive. At the time, Hemino Abad, Professor Arceliana, Marjorie Ivasco, and they were all wonderful people, so we had a great time. First thing that attracted me to journalism was my father started bringing in magazines, and I would flip into the magazines and I would see this editorial column, and I would ask my father, "What are these names here?" "Oh, they're the writers, they're the editors." And one day, if you'd like to do that, you'd find your name there. So that's something that excited me. Right after the Gulf War, Saudi Gazette, I was sent to the Eastern Province. That's where the oil fields are. The lack of social life. Well, I didn't miss it in the sense that, I was looking for it. I turned it to my advantage by going back to myself. I read most of the time. I write. It gave me a lot of time to write. 91, I was there, and then I came back in 94. And then I rejoined NHK, the Japanese Broadcasting, and then I joined the Gulf News. It's a Manila-based news organization, print. I was in correspondence with a friend, which became my future partner. A long-distance relationship doesn't work. I thought it would be better if I joined him there in the Netherlands. It was actually a big risk because I had to leave everything here, start from zero. In the Netherlands, it was more like, this is something different because this has something to do with your personal life. So in that sense, I know that I had to learn the language instinctively. At the same time, the Netherlands also has a requirement that you had to learn the language. As a writer, you don't get that much feedback. So to me, when I join a contest, it's the one way of getting feedback. And the prize is a bonus, of course. Meritage Press is a fun competition. It's It was organized by the Filipino community in the States. I submitted. And the first and careful season, and turned out to be, it won the first prize. It touches on the themes of war and displacement. The Palanca Award I joined in 2010. It was the 60th anniversary. So it was kind of a special thing to win at that time. I got one of the runner-ups prizes. The literary art, it's more abstract. The visual art is more immediate, the effect. I am fascinated by the physicality of the visual arts. I'm actually a newbie in the visual arts. I've been doing it something like 10 years or so. Not a long time like others. And I haven't done formal training. So in order to compensate, I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of going to museums, looking at people's works. Like any other families, we have photo albums, and it's a visual kind of journey back into the past. And my mother would keep it in a separate place because these are like memories. I work intuitively. It's always my way of working, even in poetry. I don't have a set plan. So when I'm faced with the material, in this case a photograph, I would look at it and then I would start on an area. As long as the feeling stays that there's something missing, then I continue. But when the feeling subsides, then I stop. I started collecting postcards when I went into flea markets in Europe. Old photos from the 1920s. I just love looking at the costumes, the way how people show themselves in these portraits. I choose pictures from the 70s or the 80s, the 1950s. The embroidery would add texture to the photograph, and it would add color to it. Embroidery is associated with a female kind of art. You wouldn't expect somebody to embroider if you're a man. I want to have that kind of tension. It would be based on my collection of photographs in a physical box, or in a digital drive. I would pick out the most remarkable, something that can be useful in terms of collage or in terms of embroidery, assemblage in the case of sculptural works. It's a delicate balance because I have an 8-hour job. I would be at home by 6 and we would go quickly into dinner, etc. So by 9 I would start my art. I would do it just in one continuous flow, taking breaks until around 1 to 2 a.m. in the morning.
In Paris, at Rue Magenta, I saw a homeless man picking cold beans from a bloated tin can. He wore a smile as big as the Arc de Triomphe and called out, "Give me 60 cents, man." His half circle of yellowed teeth and swollen gums are those of sleepy lions in National Geographic TV, eyes wary of the fading African sun of tourists peering from safari buses.
We had to work on our memory. We must remember things in the past and try to, to come to terms with it. Otherwise, you cannot move on forward. The Dutch, the most admirable trait that I could say is their egalitarian way of thinking. And one example of that is I would go into the parliament, and here comes somebody in a bike, and that would be the prime minister. In the Netherlands, the justice system works efficiently. But in the Philippines, these are very serious crimes, and yet the families are waiting for decades. If the justice system doesn't work, nothing else would, work.
Somewhere, the point of a gun moves, lace curtains drawn, the cinnabar girl disappearing to an alley. At a bar table, Le Figaro opens at page 4. Tomorrow, all headlines will spill stories of shifting continents.
The first thing that struck me when I was in Jeddah was how barren the landscape is. And the heat, it was something like 45, 40 degrees. The Saudis, they have this groundedness, that connection to the land. They would say, Inshallah, God willing. I mean, I had this assignment. I would like to finish this. Can you get in touch with? No, Joel, don't worry. Inshallah, tomorrow. It's also okay. I'm in a gray place. I'm not totally ruling out that I won't be back in the Philippines for good, but my roots are digging deeper. So I always tell my friends, my Dutch friends, the longer a migrant stays outside of his country, the more difficult it is to return. I'm in that place right now. I've been, almost 2 decades staying, so I find it more difficult when I return in terms of being rooted. I guess the roots are not as strong as before. So when I come back, I see the same buildings, but it has a layer of being different. So I lose that through the years.